We welcome you to another edition of Being Well Informed. My name is Claudia Barber. I am the podcast host, and this is another edition in which we enlighten and share what this community relevant topic is about. And today we are going to talk about the industry of estate appraisals. And I have as a wonderful guest on this fine afternoon, Genice Lee. Hello, hello.
Hello, how are you? I'm glad to be here.
Good, good, good. We're glad to have you here as well. So, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the world of estate appraisals.
Well, that seems to be one of the most frequently asked questions that I get. I am a decorative arts and antiques appraiser. I've been doing it for over 18 years, and I got started in the industry as a hobby. And, people say that when you do what you love, that it won't ever seem like work. And the push into the industry came from my husband, who challenged me to find a way to create income from the hobby because I loved going to estate sales, rummage sales, and on occasion an auction and purchasing things. And after he put down the gauntlet of that challenge, I rose to the challenge, went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and got accredited in their connoisseurship program, learning about antiques and decorative arts.
So, there is accreditation that goes along with this.
Yes, and I would definitely recommend. There are a lot of people out here who are hobbyists, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're looking to have an appraisal written for the IRS, for non cash charitable contributions, for court cases, for insurance policies, you definitely want to work with an accredited appraiser.
Wonderful news and good. And that's the whole point of being well informed. We want our audience to know the things that are just not common knowledge. And sometimes you can Google things, but it's good to hear people say it out loud and share their knowledge and their resources and how they really were introduced into in this particular instance, a state appraisal. Now, I've seen you on television on, is it Antique Roadshow? Is that the name of the show?
So it actually was not the Antiques Roadshow. And that is, of course, a very popular and well known show, not only in the
Yes.
US, but its origins are from the UK. I was on a regional public television production called Chesapeake Collections, and it is more known for being and utilizing appraisers and objects in the Northeast region of the United States.
So are Black estate appraisals, is that a common thing?
No. So in the United States itself, there are a number of appraisal associations. I will mention what I consider to be the top four. There is the American Society of Appraisers. There is the International Society of Appraisers. There is RICS, and I would misquote myself. I do not know the formal how to break that acronym out, but they launch out of the UK, and then there is AAA out of New York. And so these are some of the top appraisal associations in the country and recognized nationally and internationally. And out of the ones in the United States, there's really only about maybe three to 4,000 personal property appraisers in the country. And
Wow.
so then when you start talking about how many African Americans hold the credentialing of accredited appraiser, the numbers drop down to maybe 40 across
Wow.
the organizations, if that. And I know that in the three that I mentioned, International Society of Appraisers, ISA, ASA, and AAA, there are a handful of African American women appraisers, and out of those organizations, there are about 10 of us nationwide.
10.
10.
Oh my. Well, how did you get introduced to the Antique Appraiser program, especially the Chesapeake broadcast that you did for Maryland Public Television?
So I've been, like I said, at appraising for a while, over 18 years. And the opportunity for the Chesapeake Collectibles, interestingly enough, came to me after I had relocated from Maryland to Dallas, Texas. And I have been very fortunate in this space to have as a mentor and also work with another female African American appraiser who resides in Virginia. Her name is Alva Binder, and her company is Melanin Art Appraisals. Her specialties are African art and African American fine art. I hold the designation as generalist. So I'm like your general practitioner. I look at some of everything in the house. I look at silver and rugs and furniture and luxury handbags and vintage clothing and books. And so we have two different specialties, but early on at the beginning of this journey for me, she took me in and I apprenticed to her for 5 years. She became aware of the opportunity on Chesapeake Collectibles and felt that I would be a great fit for the show. And she passed that opportunity on to me, and I'm grateful to her for that.
You did so well. I saw it and I was just energized by what I saw and the fact that you had such an excellent presentation, but not only your presentation, the point is that you were evaluating and appraising Black art, as I remember,
Yes.
and that is significant. How do we get to that point where we can be that good?
It the industry of appraising is definitely not for the faint of heart,
Mhm.
and it is more of a marathon than a short sprint. I mean, the process to accredit in these organizations begins with the education, where you learn how to identify what the objects are made from, what makes the object valuable, what are your obligations and fiduciary responsibilities as an appraiser to the work and to your client base that you're working with. And so there is completing the coursework, and then there is testing in your specialty. So I tested as a generalist, and I was tested on glass and furniture, just kind of a broad overview of items. And once that test was passed, to accredit at the first tier, and I'm going to speak specifically for the American Society of Appraisers, which is the organization that I began with. I do belong to two organizations. I belong to the American Society of Appraisers, and I also belong to the International Society of Appraisers. And with ASA, I tested, and the first tier was accredited member, and that was after a certain number of hours and certain number of hours, the testing, and then a submission of reports to be reviewed by a board and and cleared. And so there's also an ethics piece to it that appraisers need to adhere to. And then the requirement for that is a certain number of hours appraising or working on things pertaining to appraising. And then I reaccredited or not reaccredited. I leveled up to accredited senior appraiser of the American Society of Appraisers a few years later because I had the hours to do that. And that is the most senior level that you can get in that organization.
So, when you're talking about the accreditation, is this state regulated? Do they require licensure or accreditation, or is this just something that a state appraiser should have?
It is not state required, and that's one of the things that can be challenging about this space. We all are aware of the issues with the appraisal of African American homes and
Mhm.
the devaluing of those properties in comparison to other people's properties. And so, unlike real property appraisers who are regulated and licensed by the state, personal property appraisers are not, which is why at the beginning of the program, I highly recommend that when people are looking to work with an appraiser, they work with an accredited appraiser. For personal property appraisers, our accreditation comes through our organizations. And they are also the place that holds us accountable. If you are having some issues with that appraiser and you want to be able to take it up with someone, you're able to go to the International Society of Appraisers or the American Society of Appraisers. And there is a division within the association that you can make your complaints or your concerns to, versus you working with someone who does not have the training, who's not staying up on their continuing education credits. That is why you need to work with an accredited appraiser.
So then you're also talking about the field of putting a value
Mhm.
on artwork, for example,
Yes.
that was done by, let's say, someone that may be a famous Black artist. How do
Cool.
you do that?
So when you start looking at valuing objects, there are a number of criteria that we look at. And in the industry, we call them value characteristics, which can make a simple Google not sufficient enough. And so I think one of the things that the Antiques Roadshow has done is to make the general public aware of the hidden treasures in their home and the need to not say, oh, because it's old, I should throw it away. However, just because it's old doesn't make it valuable either.
Mm.
And so when people Google, you might put the name of the object in. Well, the value characteristics are a number of things that make that object valuable. It could be the maker, it could be the provenance, meaning who did it belong to. There was a discussion of some a pearl necklace that wasn't real pearls, but costume jewelry that had substantial value that belonged to Jackie Onassis Kennedy. And the value of those pearls, if they belonged to me, was one number, and because they belonged to her, it was a substantial jump in value. And so these are the things that we are taking into consideration when we talk about value characteristics. What is it made of? Is it made of wood? Is it made of real gold? Is it made of silver? Is it an oil on canvas? Is it a print? Is it a limited edition lithograph versus something that's more like a poster where hundreds of them were made? All of these things contribute to the value of the object. And these are the things that we as appraisers are thinking about.
Now, there are a couple of things that I remember about, for example, Antique Roadshow. There was one time someone ran across some civil rights relics. One was just photographs of people during the civil rights movement, and then boom, all of a sudden there was a photograph of the late Congressman John Lewis. So
Mhm.
automatically the value sort of went up on that item just because his picture was in the photo. And that was fascinating. But that sounds like, again, an appraisal issue. And how do you value something like that?
Again, because the congressman, the significant impact that he's made historically, I think when we start to think about photographs, when we think about archives, and this is something I want the audience to pay attention to. And I've been sharing this with a lot of groups that I've had the opportunity to speak to. And this is about when you have a family member who you're going through the items in the house, and the tendency for a lot of us is to just throw the paperwork away. Oh, it's just old papers. However, archives can be very valuable because we now sit in a space from a historical standpoint where we want to understand the stories historically from different perspectives. We don't just want one narrative. And so when you have a gentleman like the congressman, yes, that's his story at a national level, but even stories at regional levels, regional significance. I can think of a woman that I met here in the Dallas area who is the widow of a Tuskegee Airman. Yes, there was a lot of attention paid to the Tuskegee Airman and her husband, and just the amazing story that that group of men and what they did for our country. But we also can look at the fact that his wife, in and of her own right, was an artist in this region, and her paintings reflected stories from growing up in Black Fort Worth, Texas, and telling a story that we don't often hear about. So when we have this paperwork that fills in the gap, that's telling stories that we don't know about, that's giving us another perspective, it becomes valuable. Now, of course, it would take more detail to go into everything that you should look at. But however, if you have a family member that was active in the community, did something in the community, served in a niche role, we want to pay attention. Those are the papers we want to see. We want you to keep them. We don't want you to throw them away. So just keep that in mind as you have family members that are passing away, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, as you are handling these estates, to pay attention, because those that could be money that's being thrown in the garbage. And also, that's a part of our legacy as African Americans. Those stories need to be told.
Now, does the value of an individual, well, we know that many have legacies,
Mhm.
but then when people die, does their estate value, or the value of their estate, increase automatically? Such as if you're Michael Jackson, if you're Whitney Houston, I'm sure the sales of their music may have changed dramatically after they died. But for example, I have in my possession, because I interned at the time at WJZ TV Channel 13 in Baltimore, an autograph of that Oprah Winfrey signed in my autograph book. Oprah Winfrey, the real Oprah Winfrey, because I interned at the station when she was doing People Are Talking, and I interned in the newsroom. So at some point, maybe in the future, there might be some value on that.
It could. And again, this is where we talk about the value characteristics, all these different elements that come together to touch and either elevate the value of the object. And so, yes, a signature can be valuable. And another thing that determines value is rarity. So then the question becomes, how many things has she signed? How many things did people keep? What did she sign it on? Was it signed on a napkin? Was it signed on a picture? All of those things do impact the value.
Now, when you're talking about famous people, because at the time that I was interning at the station, she's not where she is now, which is a billionaire status. But to the extent that everything she does, even when she makes an endorsement of a candidate,
Mhm.
it tends to be valuable. But then, when you're thinking about other civil rights relics, such as Booker T. Washington,
Mhm.
having a photograph of Booker T. Washington. Even, for example, furniture that we have, our grandma has and our great grandma has. Let's say that mahogany piece of furniture, where it was heavy dining room furnitures that was in many houses in the past. I mean, is there more value now to that type of furniture?
So here is the challenge about the antique space and even the art space. There, in the past, I think there's been an assumption where people have thought, oh, because it's older, back to the it's because it's old, it's valuable. And that's not necessarily true. Like the stock market, the antique furniture and decorative arts market and art market also have its rises and the up and down of that market. So when we start talking about mahogany furniture and what I deem to be older furniture, and unfortunately what is now also being called brown furniture, depending on who you're talking to, um, sometimes those right now the market for those pieces is not substantial unless there's something significant and rare about the piece of furniture. we've got a few things going on in the market right now. We've got well, we're all still reeling from the effects of COVID and the loss of people. Then we've got an older generation that is retiring and downsizing, and so you've got a saturated market. There are a lot of these pieces that are now flooding the market, and so they're not as rare, and so they're not as valuable. And then also you've got a younger generation. They're not interested in those pieces, those older pieces of mahogany furniture. What they're interested in right now is mid century modern, straight, sleek lines, teak wood. And so, because the people who love those pieces are getting rid of those pieces, and you don't have a generation that's interested in those pieces, the prices have gone down in the market. And sometimes those pieces can be hard to not only sell, it can be hard to get the auction houses to sell them for you, and sometimes it can be hard for the charities to come and take those pieces away. The charities are getting quite picky about what they will and won't take now.
That's true. That's very true. I've been in some estate, matters, and had been involved in cases in which charities become very picky about what they want and what they don't want. So that's really a good point. And for example, your website, Harvest Estate and Appraisals.com, what can we learn from that website?
That website, I think one of the most valuable things about the website, aside from the fact that it's a way to reach out and contact me, it holds a number of talks that I've done, and they're educational talks. And so, um, you can see subjects that I've talked about. There are a few videos there. So to your point, yes, I've been on Chesapeake Collectibles. I had the pleasure of being on WHUR radio in Washington, D.C. at one point, and their XM radio station version of WHUR. I've also been featured in the newspaper. So it's a space to see some of the topics that I've talked about, from downsizing to how to properly care for your collection, how to store things, if you need to have restoration work done on things. Again, how to find a qualified expert to work on restoring furniture and artwork, things like that.
Now, does your work take you into stamp collection? Where is that going in the future? And what about coin collections?
I get a number of questions about stamp collecting. And again, it's going to depend on what's in the collection that makes it valuable. Now, with the coins, the older pieces have more silver in them. And again, it gets to be depending on what's in the collection. And I have a reference library, and I'm looking at things. And one thing that I do want people to understand, and this is what people I think misunderstand about the Antiques Roadshow and shows like that. Those shows are for entertainment. And as appraisers, we do charge fees to provide people with our expertise and knowledge base. However, we're not, walking databases or computers. And so, one thing that you don't see on the show is when that piece is presented to us, we are able to do research. And so, appraisers are really good researchers. That's a major part of what we do, is to get down to the nitty gritty and research information on that object. And that takes time, that takes access to private databases and auction databases and art databases, which we have to pay for. And so, when you're talking about the coin collections and the stamp collections, at that point, again, I would specifically speak to what it is the client is looking to do. So, kind of a quick overview of when you reach out to an appraiser, one of the first questions you're going to be asked is, what is it that you're looking to do with the information you get? So, my question is, so why do you want an appraisal? Are you looking to sell the object? Do you want to insure the object? Do you want to donate the object? Do you just want to know more about the object? And that will drive the process. And so that directs how I assess and work through the project for you. each project that I do with people, it's different. It's always the same. Nope. It's always slightly different depending on what's going on with the family, what the need is, how quickly it needs to be done. Sometimes it's just educating people about the process, because a lot of times it's the lack of understanding the processes in this space that make people frustrated and angry at the end of something that they paid for.
Now, sometimes I've seen on the antique shows, someone will present an item, and sometimes it's 5 digits, maybe $5,000. I think the John Lewis photo that was in the collection, someone bought this. I think he said he bought it for $10 or something like that, and
Okay.
then it was appraised for something like $5 or $6,000, if my memory serves me correctly. But then there's a question as to, some items coming in at $50,000 and $60,000 and
Mhm.
$100,000. And how does Black art fit into this and the fairness of those appraisals?
African American art. So, when you talk about Black art, then we can start talking about niching that discussion. So, as I mentioned before, my mentor, her specialty was African art. So, are we talking about art of the continent of Africa? Are we talking about African American fine art and memorabilia? Are we talking about emerging artists? All of this art has a different market and different market value. So let me talk a little bit about just African American fine art over the last maybe 8, 9 years. The
Mhm.
African American art market has done very well, and so much so that it's brought attention to emerging African American artist. And so when I say very well, um, what we consider to be masters, like a Jacob Lawrence, one of his pieces has sold for $1 million. And we know that an Amy Sherald, who did Michelle Obama's portrait, her artwork sells in the millions of dollars. And so these artists are now getting the recognition and the values. But in some cases, there still is that discrepancy between the African American art market and the non-African American art market, and the values and what things are being, what prices people are willing to pay for these things. But there is definitely an increased interest in the African American art market. What I love is I love seeing these artists make their money before they die. I think that's important. People want to go into art and they
Yeah.
want to make a living at it. And in the past, some of the masters, well, I mentioned that one, but some of the African American masters did not see an elevation in their values to sustain them. Their art pieces weren't selling for $1 million. And one of the things that is changing in the art space is a lot of times it's in a secondary sale that the numbers are increasing. So the artist produces the piece, they sell it to the first person, and they get a certain amount. But as that piece moves around, say I buy a piece from the artist, it sells for a certain amount of money, and I sell it to you, and that artist's market starts going up. The artist doesn't see any of that money. And so there are now being things done with blockchain technology to try to compensate these artists in the secondary market where the piece is out of their hands and it's being sold maybe from collector to collector or collector to auction house. Those type of transactions they're trying to now build in ways for the artists to still be able to get money from their creation. I think that's great.
Understood, understood. So, but in that instance, it sounds like the artist's work is appreciating in value.
Yes, it is. Mhm.
So then, again, unless you have now, in the music industry, you have things copyrighted and royalties that allows, the music artist to receive some compensation for the selling of their work. Not so much, I guess, the resale. It's the resale industry that is where many of the, I guess, the original artists lose their opportunity for compensation.
Right, right. It's that after that initial transaction, the ability to have residual income, if you could say that, from their artwork, we kind of lose that. I think today's artists, they're a lot more savvy. There are some things in the past that our artists did not do that they're doing. One of the things that comes up in the art space period is when things start to appreciate to in value, then the spurious copies begin to come out. And an easy way to say that is fakes. People start to produce fakes, and we do have that in the African American art market. And so
Mm.
you have to be careful. That's where you want someone with that trained eye to confirm that. I'm working on a gentleman's collection here in Dallas, and there was a particular piece. The artist has passed away. That artist is in the southern region. I reached out to a gallery that represents him, and the person who is now managing that artist estates informed me that there are fakes of this gentleman out on the market, and he identified for me, some of the things behind. If it's this, then that was not done by him. If it's this, that was not done by him. And he specifically mentioned a piece on a particular website that I will not mention, that had a piece that he was adamantly clear that that piece was not done by the artist that is up for sale. And so um, the artists are getting more savvy. Things like a catalog resigne, which is a record of all the pieces that the artist has created. Artists, they evolve, they change. They might do oil on canvas and at one point, and then they may work in glass at another point. And so, as the mediums that they use change, we kind of want a record of how they mature and evolve as an artist. That helps, I think, collectors. I know it definitely helps appraisers. It helps us to track um, the increase or decrease in their market. So these are things that help to stabilize their market. And so artists are getting better at that. They're getting better at getting proper representation. They're getting better at contracts and copyrights and things like that to protect their art, to make sure that the income is coming to them.
That's marvelous, and these are things that I guess the average person would never necessarily think about on a regular basis. But thank you again, Genice Lee, and all that you've shared with us today. We are looking forward to seeing you again, if not on this podcast, but definitely, I'm sure, on Maryland Public Television and their antique shows that are displayed, as well as WHUR. Thank you again for stopping by.
Thank you.